So welcome, everyone. Glad you're here this evening for this special speaker series evening. My name is Cynthia Cutting from the Museum of the White Mountains, and I'm very proud to be here with my right and left hand, Rebecca Enman, who is your face that you see when you come to the museum, and she has been doing an awesome job managing these programs for us as well. So really glad to be here with her. And before we get started into our material, I need to thank a few people. First off, I'd like to thank our members. Those of you who are members of the Museum of the White Mountains, you make programs like this happen. Your support is so important to us, and we are very grateful. We had such a wonderful, loyal group of members who kept us going through COVID and allowed us to reopen with this wonderful exhibit, Wayfinding Maps of the White Mountains. Really grateful to our members. If you're not a member yet, you do have that opportunity. We would welcome you to join this great group of people that care about all things White Mountains, all the different topics. And what we love about the museum is that our members give us ideas and they give us feedback and they help us to grow. And I think that we're here today because so many members have contributed ideas and support in many different ways. And that really makes the museum a very special place. Feels very grassroots to us. So thank you, and welcome to anyone who would like to join us as members. I'd also like to thank our Museum of the White Mountains Advisory Council, who are our special supporters and advisors. They meet with us regularly, they contribute ideas all the time, and several of them have become co-curators for our exhibitions, like Adam Apt, who is with us this evening and is the, hey, Adam, go ahead and wave. Adam is the co-curator for Wayfinding, and many of the pieces in the beautiful exhibition are from his collection. And we're very grateful to the work that he's put in for a couple of years to make that exhibition happen. So it's wonderful to have him with us and other advisors who are here this evening. And finally, I need to thank New Hampshire Humanities. We have a wonderful grant from New Hampshire Humanities that has funded the entire speaker series this summer. And we are very grateful. This is such a great help to us. It allows us to pay people, but also just to not allocate funds from other places. So it's really wonderful that the New Hampshire Humanities really cares about how we all not only hear the material, but then we discuss it and we share it. So that's really important. And part of that is we have a survey, which Rebecca will be sending you in her thank you for attending that you'll get in the next couple of days. And in there's a survey, and I do hope you'll click on it and add any input or feedback that you have. That's part of our requirement for our grant, and it really helps the Humanities Council understand how things work and what works and what New Hampshire people really want to have happen. So really great piece there. So I'm so excited to introduce Mark. It must have been something like 4 years ago when I first heard from Mark. I think I got just kind of an email out of the blue that described something that he had at his home in his garage, a collection of topographical maps. And I just was so excited about it. And I was lucky enough to be invited to go and see them in real life and have a conversation with Mark about how they could be part of an exhibition that we were thinking about doing. It was kind of out a couple years, but we were thinking about having a maps focus exhibition. I thought, oh, wow, how cool would this be? So I was stunned and delighted by Mark's collection, which you will see some of these things today, and of course at the museum. And so many of them, we could have filled the entire museum with Mark's work, but they are just so fabulous. I'm so excited for you all to hear about his work this evening. Now, Mark is a retired middle school science teacher. He taught earth science at the final point of his career at Three Rivers School in Pembroke. He has hiked all 48 of the 4,000 footers, and I understand there's several of you 4,000 footer club people in the room this evening. Mark was the recipient of the 1999 Christa McCall Sabbatical Award, and you will be hearing from him what he did with that very special award time. Mark lives in Chichester with his wife, and I'm so grateful to have this educator's perspective that he brings to the exhibition and to the speaker series. Before Mark gets started, just a couple of little housekeeping notes. Again, please, if you've just come in, please add any questions that you have to the chat as we go through Mark's talk, and Rebecca will be raising those to him at the end. And a special note tonight, Mark is going to be using his table as his classroom display area. He's going to hold up things to his screen. So the best view for you to click on your computer this evening would be to select speaker view, so that when Mark is talking, he pops up bigger on your screen than the rest. And then at one point, I'll be sharing a screen with some images that Mark's sharing, but that will be the best way for you to be part of Mark's classroom this evening. So welcome, Mark. Thank you so much for being here. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, take it away.
So good evening, everybody. And although I have taught for 38 years in the trenches of middle school, I never did any Zoom presentation, so I missed out on the pandemic. So if I, am nervous or I mess up, just cut me a little slack because I'm new to all this. I hope this presentation will remind you and entice you to get over to the museum if you have not done so yet. It has a lot of cool history, tons of maps. You really have to enjoy maps to, enjoy the exhibit, and just a lot of cool things. One thing that's stood out to me was the little wheel that was used to measure, I assume, trails. And so it has a lot of cool things like that to check out. So if you haven't been to the exhibit, I thought I would start by just showing you one of my contributions to the exhibit. It's a map of Owl's Head, which is one of the 4,000 footers in the state of New Hampshire. And I'll just show you that and then make a couple little, personal comments about it. So I'm going to switch screens briefly, and my wife is the official screen mover. So I'm going to reach over here. So this is one of the models that I made, and it's of Owl's Head. And where you guys are looking sort of in this direction, you're looking from maybe towards the Kangamangas Highway or the call it Lincoln Woods parking lot. And one thing, like just some personal notes on Owl's Head, a lot of people sort of give it a bad rap because it is one of the longer hikes that you have to do in the 4,000 foot quest. And when you get to the top, there is not a view. It's long. There are a lot of water crossings. The trail that leads up to it is an unmarked trail. But I think this map kind of elevates it a little bit from just sort of an 8-mile walk to nowhere. When you look at this, and this is where Owl's Head is right here in the middle. So this whole area is the Pemigewasset wilderness. And I liked it because I thought the all the river crossings, that really appeals to me. It's sort of a challenge. The hike up the slide, there is a kind of a nice view from here. You can see the backside of Franconia Notch, which is really nice. But it's more about adventure than it is, peak bagging. So if you have climbed all the 4,000 footers and Owl's Head being one of them, you'd also enjoy on this map. And it really, so you might think you've really hiked nowhere. You've hiked into one of the coolest spots in New Hampshire. So here's Owl's Head, and I'm just tracing around, and this is Franconia Ridge here. This is Garfield. This is South Twin. These are the Bonds. And if you do a lot of hiking, one of the cool things that hiker would like to do is try to hike all that in one day. I've never done it, but I have a buddy that has. So the real thing about these models is even if you go by yourself or with your friend that's hiker, you can just kind of like relive a hike. You might plan for a hike, but it's, it just brings up memories, or like I said, you can plan for a hike, and it's just fun to look at. So I'm going to sneak back over here. So if you are sitting there staring back at me, you are either a 4,000 footer person, probably, possibly like my wife, who has never climbed a 4,000 footer, and a lot of people that I know. You might just go like, how do you make that thing anyways? Also, you might be interested in the art aspect of it. And I wouldn't consider myself an artist or a painter or anything like that, but I learned a lot about it and it was a lot of fun. So you might pick up a few things about that. And like a lot of the presentations on this series, you might wonder, like, why would somebody do something like that? Some of the other ones that I've seen online, like the Snowbound, and the woman that did the one where she was like foil and she did some dancing. I don't know, it's just so those kind of things. I never once thought, geez, that was a dumb thing to do. It was like, wow, huh. So I guess I'm in that, why did somebody do that? And I'm one of those persons that did something, and it's very exciting. And if I forget, just like the other woman there, I really want to thank the university and Cynthia for putting this all together and the exhibit, and the opportunity to share something that you think is cool with a bunch of other people is a lot of fun. So I think when I got ready to do the presentation, it was fun just to think and reflect back on how I got to this point and a lot of things that I did when I was teaching. And so I really kind of gone through some highlights, like what are some things along the way that I thought were cool that, ended up, in this exhibit. So the first one, when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, I don't know if many of you ever made any little plastic models, scale models. My dad was in the Navy, and so he would always get me like one of a destroyer or the little planes. And so anyways, you'd glue them together, and then you could always paint them after, which was a lot of fun. So I did that. Any of you ever make creepy crawlers when you were a kid? There's like a little stove and a mold, and you'd kind of squirt some plastic in it and it would heat up and it would pop out. So I guess that was my basis for plastic, gluing plastic, painting plastic. That paint always impressed me. You put the gloss paint on that and it was like steel on there. So, I'd say that was my earliest highlight. Skipping ahead, just a quick description. I would consider myself more of a sports outside guy. So I played sports in high school and college, and just loved being outside. And so I ended up being a liberal arts guy and went to Colby College in Waterville, Maine. And I graduated with a degree in biology. My junior year, I went to Pomona College in Southern California, which was a lot of fun. And I ended up taking a couple geology classes there, which I think really had an impact on me later on in my teaching. And one thing also, they went on awesome field trips there. So from 1979 to 1988, those 9 years, I was a high school biology teacher, a middle school life science teacher, and a physical science teacher at different schools. And in 1988, I started my first of 28 years at Three Rivers School in Pembroke, New Hampshire. So my first gig there was 8th grade earth science. So I remember going in there and I had like boxes of rocks. There were some landform models, and they also had some topographic maps. So if any of you have ever been teachers, you know, particularly science, you got to kind of go where what you got stuff for. So it was, I always kind of thought of it to be sort of an omen that it's one of the topographic maps, and it's of Pembroke and the Three Rivers School. This is the Suncook River, this is the Sowcook River, and this is the Merrimack River. And the whole town is right in the middle of the map. So if you've ever worked with these, or just the fact that the whole town is right on the map, and all the stuff that we might talk about was there. So I kind of, and I love hiking. So I said, and when I jumped from high school to middle school and all that, I really shifted from the discipline that I was trained in biology, and I just found that teaching middle school is much more fun. I really liked the hands-on deal. I loved any excuse to try to get the kids to go outside. I made sure I always took them on a field trip, a hiking one. So that my time in Pembroke was really exciting. So I thought I would just quickly, in case some of you are teachers, or if you have a daughter or son or grandson or whatever, and you like hiking, you might want to just do a couple things to teach them about topography. These are some of the activities that I always thought were good ones. The first one is just kind of called it Drowning the Mountain. So I've made a bunch of different types of models. Some of them, like this one, has like 3 mountains on it. This one right here has kind of like a river valley on it. This one right here, I made specifically just so they could see, this side is awfully steep and this side is quite gradual. So what you do with these models, and this is what they have to do, they get a little tub, and it has, on this, you probably can't see, but these are different elevations. They're just made up ones, 100, 200, 300, and 400, whatever. And when I first did it, and we didn't have any of these, I would put like, we do one as a class, and I put some rocks, that were maybe pyramid shaped inside here, something that kind of looked like a, mountain. And what the kids do is they sort of drown the model. So one of the first rules of topography is 0 elevation is like the seashore, where the ocean is. So that's kind of the idea here. So what we're going to do is we're going to just add water. So they take the model and they pour it up to a line where some of the model starts to get covered up. So let's say it lands on 200. There's a little cover, and then they look down and they get a magic marker, and on a piece of plastic they just look down and they trace the water line. So because water is like self-leveling, it goes to the same elevation. So that point along that contour line is all the same elevation. So they take the cover off, they dump some more water in, and they slowly start to sink or drown the island. And so when they get through, trace the next one, more water to the next line, and so on. So you end up with a topographic map. And from even that experience, they'll get the idea that, geez, like every time it goes up over this mountain, the little circle gets smaller. So they get the idea that when they see a stack of like pancakes, it's like a mountain going up. If the lines are close together, it's steep. The lines are far apart, it's more gradual. So they'll pick up that just doing that one activity. Another activity, and it was awesome at Three Rivers, because the high school track was within 100 yards of the back door. And so I would take them over to the high jump, or not the long jump pit. And if I couldn't do that, one class in the group that I taught, I made like a little sandbox. So you fill it up with sand, and then you can do an activity, and you can do a lot of activities actually, but so, and then you give them a little map, and all the sand is just in the pile, and then they have to like scoop it into, and So if you know a little bit about topography, you can see there's like a little hill here, and this little hill has more lines than this one over here. So here's like a hill, and then here's a little hill, and there's like a little valley in between, and they, you know, try to create that in the sand. So within a class, you might have, well, I have like 6 sandboxes. So you might have half the group doing one and half the map doing another map, and then they switch. So they might look at the other person's map and see how theirs compared to the one they made. And also the ones that had a different map, they would have to make a drawing of what the people made with the, you know, the map that they had gotten. So they would, and you'd be surprised, like even if the other kids were looking at just the sand model and then drawing a map, the 2 maps, you know, would be pretty darn close. So that's a lot of fun, that one. Middle school kids, sandboxes. So that's really fun. So once they get to that point, then they're able to draw, you know, a topographic map of their own. So they kind of know what a mountain looks like. I have all my models, you know, laying around, so they might get some ideas for that, from that. And then one of the culminating activities is to make a 3D topographic map, similar to the ones that I've made. So what happens there is they draw a topographic map, say it looks like that. Then they go to the window and they trace another copy like that. So they have 2 maps that are the same. Then what they do is they cut off the lowest elevation. So you work at the bottom and then go up. So they would cut off, in this particular example, 20, right? So instead of looking like that, it looks like that now because they cut it off. Put it on a piece of paper or cardboard, trace it, and then cut that off. So they end up with that. Oops, that. Okay, and now they take this and then they go to the next elevation. So that's 30. They cut that off. That's what the little piece looks like. Trace that on a piece of cardboard. And then, so one map keeps getting smaller, and the other map is the one that you use to make sure that you put it together right. So you look on that. And you just keep working your way up piece by piece by piece. Okay, and I'll just show you. This is just a map that I made of the town library in Chichester. So that is the town of Chichester. And that's what it looked like before I made the, you know, plastic on the outside. Right, so it's not, you know, if you really hustled, you could do that in, you know, a bunch of hours. All right, so, you know, get out there and try to teach your daughter or granddaughter or somebody about topographic maps. Maybe you learned something yourself just now. Okay, so couple other things that were important. 1990-ish, there was a documentary by Nova. It was called Taller Than Everest. And it was really cool. Like if you ask most kids, most adults probably, you know, who was George Everest? And they would probably say, first guy that climbed it is a big answer. You know, a president or a ruler or something like that. Nope. Okay, and nobody ever guessed that he was basically a surveyor. And so this documentary, part of it was how they discovered Mount Everest. So it was part of the trigonometric survey of India. So the colony, you know, British colony, they're mapping India. So they started at one end, you know, down by the tip of India, and they worked their way from the coast, and they employed trigonometry. So it's been a while since you've all been in school probably, but basically if you know one side of a triangle and you know 2 angles, you can figure out what that other angle is, and you can figure out the other sides are. And you can even do that in 8th grade. So we did some, and they proceeded across India. And basically when they got up to the northern part, it was like, whoa, look at those. You know, they're looking across the Himalayas, and Mount Everest was initially peak 15. So that was part of the process. They also did spirit leveling, which is finding elevations. So every kid will, you know, once we just talk about it, they'll say like, oh yeah, like you'll see people along the side of the road with those little telescope things. So yeah, those are surveyors. So we talked about that. So the reason I bring that up is it had all kinds of simulations. So we like simulated these triangulations. We'd have contests in class where they would have to figure out like a cone across the driveway, how far away that cone is from where they were. So they would make measurements, they would do scale models. We didn't get into like trigonometric functions and all that, but they could do that. We did spirit leveling. So we had a little level with a marble on it, and they'd have to keep it level with sights on either end, and they'd look this way at one, I forget, like meter stick basically, and one on the other end, then you could see that it went up or down. So it was really lent itself to some cool things. So that was a lot of fun. And also on the video, they were talking about Brad Washburn. Who's like a big map person in America. He'd map Mount Denali, map Mount Washington, and he made a map with National Geographic and also the Museum of Science down in Boston, a map of Mount Everest. So he talked about aerial photographs and how actual topographic maps are made. And that we had all kinds of cool things that we could do. All right, 1993, I'm reading the sports page, and there was a international orienteering meet at Pawtuckaway State Park. I had never heard of it before. So I was reading about the description, and it talked about these races where people would use a detailed topographic map, and they would race along through the park, and they have to find these different spots. So it's like a treasure hunt sort of thing. And when you get up to high level orienteering, if you're just doing orienteering, like map practice walk around a school, and there are trails or lots of man-made features, but these guys are doing it out in the middle of nowhere. You know, there's rocks and trees and little ravines, and you know, they're out in the woods. So this sport, and I just have like a little map here of what one might look like. You have to go from each spot, and they have different controls that are called, and you go to each spot and then you return. And at each spot, there is an orienteering flag, which is a 3-sided flag like this, and it has a little pincher thing in the bottom. So when you get to each spot, there's a card that you have, and you just pinch it, and it makes like a little braille mark in there. So the people can tell that, yep, that guy got to number 1, he got to number 2 and 3 and so on. So it was so cool because we started to talk in, class about things like ravines and knolls, how do they appear on a map, a saddle, which is like 2 little hills and a little dip in between. So all that comes into play in orienteering. And so I got all excited about that. Up North Orienteers is an orienteering club in New Hampshire. And so I started to go to some of those events. And so then I started to do that with the kids with topography in class. In fact, that became an integral part of it. So when kids got through, or if they got asked, in September, so what you guys do all day? Oh, we were studying orienteering is what they would say. So I would use orienteering as like a way to apply topography, in like a fun way. And I also happened to be the cross country coach. So I, would have orienteering, during my meets, so you got to trick the kids to go running, and here they have to chase things around. And so it really was a lot of fun. How are we doing on time? Okay. So let's see. All right. Another thing that happened was Mount Washington Observatory offers edu trips way back. I don't know if they still do that or not, but it was kind of cool. I was telling my wife about that. I was going to mention this, and that is that my mother-in-law took the kids and my wife down to Florida during Thanksgiving, and so she felt bad that I couldn't go because I had to teach, and she said, why don't you sign up for one of these trips? So that's how I even learned about it, and I picked the one that was offered about mapping. And so Larry Garland, who is like the map guru for Appalachian Mountain Club, he was teaching the class, and so I learned a lot about mapping, and a lot about using the GPS to map, which can really speed things up when you're mapping. And so he gave us a map that was created by Appalachian Mountain Club. All the surveying was done by Brad Washburn. And so I took it back to school, and every year, when we did the making the models and the maps, there would always be some kids that would, hey, can we make a map of Pat's Peak where we go skiing? Or can we make a map of the town? Or can we make a map? So I brought it back and said, hey, let's make a map of Mount Washington. So we made a map. It was about the same size as the one that I showed you. And the thing that was, and we presented it, to the other class, and it was awesome. So in a class with maybe 20 kids in it, some kid, a couple kids, hey, I climbed Mount Washington. And then they kind of step up and they would trace, where they went on the map and the trails, where they just kind of tell about that story. Or I've been up the Cog Railway, and then they tell the story about that, or how dirty they got in the sooty smoke. And then they also, or some of them had just gone up in the auto road. So it really was just great conversation, great sharing of being outside and doing some cool stuff. And I think that really what I thought about, and I said, I got doing the 4,000 footers. And I said, I should make some maps of the 4,000 footers. It would be fun to hang out with some, people that I hike with, and, just kind of drink beer and talk about hiking and trails that we've been on and that kind of thing. All right. So 1999, I was awarded the Christa Mccall Sabbatical Award. So that was really cool. The town that I live in is Pembroke, Chichester, Epsom, and Allenstown. Those 4 towns go to Pembroke Academy. So what I did was I went to each school. I made an orienteering map for their school. We did a lot of compass stuff. We made, did a lot of the activities that I just showed you. And so then the culminating activity was we went to Bear Brook State Park, which is a big park in Allenstown, and we had an orienteering meet. So all these kids that were in 8th grade are going to Pembroke Academy next year. So it was really cool. Kids had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And I also got some software that I could make maps. So a lot of maps here, I could look at a map, and a lot went into like like Owl's Head. How should I depict that? If you just have Owl's Head, it's not too cool. Okay, but if you plunk it in the middle of the Pemigewasset wilderness, rimmed with the Franconia Ridge and Garfield and all that, it's cool. So also I considered where people might attack it from. So probably most people that go up Owl's Head start from the Kangamangas Highway. So I kind of, geared it towards, they'd be coming this way mostly. but I also put other routes that you might be able to use. So that was fun. So after that, and through the sabbatical, it really, I was sort of in the make the maps hobby stage. So I would just kind of plug along. Maybe in a summer, I might make one or two, or if the weather was lousy in the fall, I might make one. So I just kind of, you know, like made some, and I'd leave them laying around the house, and the kids would look at them, or I'd show them, and then I'd put those away, and I'd start to make some other ones. So it was, like I said, just sort of a hobby. I kind of knew it was going, but it was kind of a long ways off. But it was just fun to make them, so I just kept doing it. So one thing that I skipped over, and I just want to show you now, is the what about the plastic? How am I'm doing that? So the guy came to school and was trying to get a aerodynamics competition going. He was trying to involve all these different schools with making little cars, and then basically they had to design what the car would look like, you know, so the wind would go over it smoothly. And so part of that involved like shaving with like some styrofoam blocks down into the shape. And then this process was used to make the model. So my wife is gonna grab the camera here, and I'm gonna just show you what's called a thermoforming machine. Oops, I'm 6'5" and I just drove my head into that light. All right. All right, that was good. I'll bring him down a little bit, back up a little bit. Okay, maybe back up a little bit more. I'm sorry, go over there. Down a little. No. Yeah. Okay. So this box that I have, let's get. There's basically three parts. So Pam is going to kind of one side. If you look down in here, I'm not sure how well you can see. It's basically like looking down in your toaster. There's a big wire, and when you turn it on, it heats up just like the wire in your toaster. So that is a heating element. In the middle here, there's a frame kind of setup, and it holds a piece of plastic, which is put in place there. The plastic is polystyrene. Here's like a little scrap of the plastic. If you're doing something that it's kind of flat-ish, you can use thin plastic. If you're using, you know, like the model that I made where there's a lot of elevation, you need more plastic, so you have to use a thicker piece. And, you know, obviously the thicker plastic is more expensive than that other plastic. So that's the plastic. On the other side, this probably won't be able to see. This thing has a bunch of little pinholes in it. It's called a vacuum table. And so when I turn it on, it sounds just like a vacuum cleaner, because that's essentially what's inside here. And it sucks air into the little holes, just like a vacuum. Okay, so what you do is, and I'll just turn the vacuum cleaner on. So you turn on the other side where the toaster is on. So you put it on there, and then as it gets hot, you guys kind of keep hitting it like that, and it gets softer and softer. And so what you do is wait, and you know, it takes a little practice to get it just the right softness, where you know that it's soft enough. Okay, and then what you do is, if you want to take your 3D model, you put it here, so there's air can suck in all right around here, and then once you think that it's, you know, soft enough, then you turn on the vacuum and put this over, and it sucks the air out between the, you know, plastic and the model. So we're not going to take the time to do that, but I'll just turn this on. So that was just with like a piece of tissue paper, but that's the gist of it. So it takes the plastic and it just sucks it down right over the model. So that process is called thermoforming. So as I was, once we started to do that, making the cardboard models, the kids would paint them at the end. They'd attach their two-dimensional model. Okay, and so the painting was kind of fun for them as well. And these paint up pretty well with just the cardboard, but there'd kind of be two kids in one model, and nobody would get to take one home if they wanted to, because there's only one model. So we started to make the models, so there would be two, and only, one kid could paint each one. So that's why we started to do it. So I started to use that. And I knew that's where I was going with my big models, that I was gonna, go through that process. So in 2017, I retired. And so my first months out, I was like, geez, if I'm ever gonna do anything with all those, this is the time. So I went into, thermoform research and development, I call it. So I went on YouTube and watched videos, and there are people that make masks. A lot of people make masks with these things, or they'd make costumes, like a stormtrooper costume, and they'd make the masks and the towels and all that. So if you go on that YouTube, you would find all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So I just kind of adapted that for the size of the model. So even back when we made the Mount Washington one, I kind of had an idea of the size that would be good for, a couple people walking around the model, checking it out. So then you have to consider how big the piece of plastic is that you have to melt. So it took a little while to kind of nail it all down. And it was, it was pretty crazy, because as far as just flipping it over, we had just a big frame, and I'll show you some pictures in a second. So it was just what you saw, sort of, made up version, and but it, worked pretty good. As far as painting it, the stuff really paints easily, just like those models when I was a kid. This is just, usually I use, those are some of the colors. This is my little work thing. And I really didn't have any training in painting at all. And I talked to some of art teachers that I knew. And so we went around, and they didn't really get like where I was going with it. But one thing that I did pick up on was sponges. So I really ended up using a lot of sponges. So a lot of, like dabbing, so you could get like the texture of the trees and the different, like evergreen trees and deciduous trees. So that worked out really well. Once in a while you'd use regular brushes. Lots of times I would use brush and just kind of like smash it like this. So put it in the paint, so you could so it wasn't just like a big glob of green. It was like little spatterings of green. So some of the models came out pretty cool. Some of them, so just like a regular artist, I guess. Sometimes you like what you're doing, but it is very. I was surprised at how exhausting it was. I mean, these are pretty big models too, so that's a lot of dabs and lots of fussing around. But you just have to go for it. I remember when the kids in school would do it, and they just, you'd give them some things and they just went for it, and they would mix the paints, and, whatever happened, it was just kind of fun to do. So I kept putting it off the painting. I kept making more plastic ones. And then I said, Mark, you just got to do it. So I started, and the first ones weren't so good, and they got a little better. So that was a lot of fun. So I did, once you paint them, as far as the plastic, I just put that on a piece of plywood and cut the plywood. I mean, you have to trim everything and make it look pretty and all that, but this is the stuff that they attach bathtubs to, like the 2x4s so spent a lot of time in Home Depot reading labels. Paint, I guess paint that goes on plastic is kind of plastic itself. So once it's on there, man, it just does not come off. I remember cutting a piece of this and just putting it in like a bucket of water for like 2 weeks, nothing. It's like on there. These are probably painted 4 years ago. And stuff is good. And it's just regular hobby plastic paint in these little tubes. They're like a couple bucks each. So we can get some colors, and then others you can mess around. I did get pretty good at the old color wheel and, you know, like tinting them and changing the colors. So that was fun. It was frustrating, but it was fun. So let me just flip through those pictures and I'll finish up here. So are you ready to go on that, Cynthia?
Yep, coming up.
All right.
The right thing here. Yes. Share. Cool. Okay, and okay.
So this is first picture. So inside the garage, you can see like that plywood piece, and that's the vacuum table. So it's just a super thin box. And in the top of the box, I think you can see in another slide, there's a bunch of holes in it. So and you can see my shop vac, and it's kind of sticking up into the bottom of the table. It's in the bottom of the model. So when you turn the vacuum on, it just sucks air through all those little holes. And obviously where the model is, it can't suck through the cardboard. So it just pulls the plastic down on top. Outside the garage, for fire reasons, is the place where I heat them up. And you can see, looks like a big picture frame with a white thing. It's got the plastic inside that's sandwiched between 2 pieces of plywood. And it's sitting on top of the like little oven that heats up the plastic. So there's the vacuum table part, and then there's the heating up the plastic. So let's try the next slide. So there's the bottom of the frame holding the plastic, and you can see all the bolts sticking up. So then another piece of plywood goes on top, like the other part of the frame, and it just sandwiches the piece of plastic and holds it in place. So that allows you to maneuver the plastic, you know, all at once. You know, if you just picked up the plastic all heated, it would just be all wiggly and wobbly. So this holds it. All right, next one. It's just the vacuum. So I just took an old attachment and drilled a hole, and so that's how the vacuum table goes. And I actually would sometimes use 2 vacuums, one, so I have another house vacuum on the other side. Next one.
Oops.
Oop.
Up there.
There you go. So there's the model on top of the vacuum table, so you can see all the little holes around it. So obviously it's just sucking the air in from the garage at this point. So then what happens is you take the frame with the heated plastic, and then it's a 2-man job, and you just kind of lower it down. And as soon as you seal the frames, it can just suck the air out between the model and the plastic, and then it sucks it right to the shape of the model. Next one, please. And so this is the heating thing. You can see at the bottom, there's a couple things sticking out, but it's basically a big plywood box, and it's lined with foil. Next one, please. So this is looking down into the box. So I just had some quartz heaters down in the bottom. I guess I should, you know, say that don't try this, you know, out in the middle of your garage. You know, make sure you're outside. So you turn those on, and then the light, it heats up, and then it all reflects around and gets hot, and it doesn't melt the bottom because all the heat rises, and then there's a gap between the thing at the bottom, so it just kind of goes out around the heaters there. Okay, next one. And then this is looking down. So it's the same frame, and you notice you can't see all the plastic, but there's sort of like a little hole in the middle. So when I first did it, I was having trouble getting the plastic hot enough. So we made another that it's like a piece of plywood with the foil on the other side. And so I put that on top of it. And so the heat couldn't like just go through the plastic and then out, you know, into the outside. And then the little hole there is so you could test it. So you would put something over, like a piece of glass over that, so the air wouldn't get out. And then every once in a while, you take the glass off, touch it with your fingers to see if it was getting, you know, soft back and forth. But it usually would take about 3 minutes for it to get soft enough. And then once that did, is you would take off that little thing with a window in it, pick up the frame with your helper, and then just kind of like walk over to the vacuum table. It's about a 2-second walk. Next one, please. And this is just shows it how it sucks down onto the model. And then very shortly, within a minute, you can just take all the little wing nuts off, separate the thing. And I think the last slide just shows the piece of plastic. So you just take the top of it off, and then almost immediately you can like jigsaw off the pieces and sand it a little bit and glue on a piece of cardboard, draw your luck at painting, and got a 3D painted bottle.
Wow.
So I think that's
it, right? Yeah.
So, sorry that took so long, but hopefully you got an idea of what that was all about. Again, reflecting back on it, it just kind of happened slowly over time. And, you know, when you're teaching and something's kind of going good, and then you go, hey, you know, I could add this to it, and I could add that to it. And then, so I would say, you know, the first 20 years at Pembroke, I did 8th grade. I did, towards the end of my career, get tired of 8th grade, which is a pretty tough age. It was a lot of fun, but I just needed to do something different. So I ended up teaching 6th grade, but we had activities where I did some on making movies, and I also did map making. So those were like 6-week classes, and we did those every 6 weeks. So I do a couple sessions of this one, as you know, kind of alternate back and forth. So those are mapping, and making videos with the kids was 2 activities that I enjoyed doing with them. So I am all through. I don't know if we have any time for questions or not, but
sure we do. Boy, thank you so much, Mark.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed it. I loved hearing, I mean, first of all, I want to say I wish that you had been my science teacher, and I would never have been so engaged with learning that topography without the hands-on perspective that you bring. That must have been so exciting for your students. Really, really great.
It was fun.
Love it. I also really loved hearing about how you use the topo maps as kind of the springboards for having students tell the stories of their hikes. I think that's so cool. Like that visual, it really shows you that visual. I can picture them like tracing their fingers over a topo and telling that story. That's just wonderful. I love it. Love it.
I have found, even when I've you know, shown them in libraries and things like that, you know, if you went to a museum, most people would not think of touching the painting, but it didn't matter. You could see people, and they just have to touch it. They have to trace their finger on it. They have to. So it doesn't bother me that, and the paint is really good, but it's really got that tactile. So while their fingers there, they can picture themselves walking on the trail or whatever it is they're thinking, but they're thinking something. Yeah. And it was just fun.
It's really fun, really great. Rebecca, how are we doing for questions and for time?
It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat. If anybody has any questions, feel free to write them. We still can absolutely hang out a couple of minutes.
I'm so curious about the cost. Like, oh, there's a question coming in. Hopefully somebody's going to ask about the materials.
The materials, I would say, to make that little thermoforming machine, I didn't even realize how much it cost because they gave it to us, but that cost $2,000, which I could not believe how expensive that was. So if you go on YouTube, I mean, people are making the frames and the plastic and putting it in their oven and heating it. So, I mean, but I would say the thing that I made, I mean, it's just plywood, although that's expensive now, but, and so I made maybe a few $100s to make the box. You know, the quartz heaters were like $30 a piece. The plastic, you can buy a big 4x8 sheet of plastic. I think it's for the thin stuff is maybe $30 or something. So it's really all the models. I would say to make all the stuff, to make the models, the paint, I mean, is pretty, I know some paint is real expensive, but this is just hobby paint or something. I'd say $1,000 maybe for, you know, to do everything. Mm-hmm. So it's not super duper expensive. And you could make a smaller, if I had it to do over again. No, I like the size of it. The models that I made, those that seem to work. If it's too small, it's got to be big enough so people can, you know, there's some space to move around. But you could, you know, take a 4x8 sheet of plywood and figure out what would be a economical, you know, way to do it. You know, so you could have 2x4 pieces, 4 of those, rather than, I think I got 3 pieces to make, you know, these. So you could mess with that a little bit. The little one, each piece of plastic was a couple bucks.
That's great. Should we have a question right now, Mark? From John, do you think this kind of craft is going to be replaced by 3D printing?
I would say probably. I think the advantage with this is it is pretty inexpensive. I mean, obviously, if you had to buy a 3D printer, that would be expensive. And it's probably a lot easier. This stuff, you know, paints so easily and it's fun to paint. So it's more for the novice kind of person. The 3D one, I have seen those, and I'm sure that technology will improve. But the scale is also important. Like I did it basically on, you know, cardboard that I could get at the recycling place. So I just go get that, or I get it for school for nothing. So that was kind of a good recycling thing. And one of the things that I also put on the map, or each map, it has the topographic map on one side with all the trails on it. So if you were a hiker and you wanted to kind of revisit that, you could. And one thing on the other side, just some little personal notes, but this particular model, it says owl's head should be 1.4 inches shorter. So the thickest it is probably 4 inches or so. So I just decided like which topography lines I wanted to use. What if I put too many, it would be too high, too few, it wouldn't show the shape. So whatever I decided on. So this model should actually be like an inch shorter. So compare.
Like educationally, I think what I love about your process for these students is they're building their mountains. So they're really getting to know the topography. So if they,
right.
I think it would be a different experience to like take a map and like send that to a computer and make the 3D
right.
thing. It's an experience.
And that really is, because when they're cutting out, so on their models, the deal was they had to have at least 3 elevations. You know, but that they could have a mountain here, so they could have, you know, 10 pieces here, 10 pieces here, 5 pieces here. So they would, you know, either cut them out. This would probably never fly. I did this for like 20 years. No one ever said anything. So I had hacksaw blades. So it was quite a scene, you know. I'd have some plywood over tables where they'd have to cut and they'd have to wear safety goggles and stuff. But I mean, you know, you compare sawing in science class cardboard with, you know, sitting in another class where you've got to stay in your seat, and, you know, just imagine that with like 20 kids, dust of cardboard in the air. It was fun. It was fun to be in there, and the kids really enjoyed it. It was, but you're right, you know, tracing out each one and the whole time, you know, that putting together. So it,
those kids know what topo maps are about now, so that really gets it. I know we're running out of time. Rebecca, are there other comments we should highlight before we close?
I guess a really nice comment is Eric, sounds like an involved process that involves experimentation. I like the combination of orienteering and topography. And then he also said it's an organic process, which is really nice. Let's see, I guess maybe a nice question to end on would be, do you know if any of your students went into a career in cartography, or in kind of or, you know, career?
I don't. Well, I'll tell you, as far as the 4,000 footer thing goes, when I started teaching at Three Rivers in earth science, the guy across the hall, Rich Onifree is his name, he was a 4,000 foot guru. Like, he had climbed them all like 4 times. And so I started going hiking with him. And at the time, I maybe climbed a dozen or so 4,000 footers, like Franconia Notch, a bunch of times, and mostly southern ones, and, you know, in high school and college and all that. And so he would take me hiking and taught me about the 4,000 footer thing, but it didn't really grab me, you know, like it can, come to find out. But it took a guy that we both had in school. His name is Dan Morris, a student, and he started do student teaching at our building. And towards the end of the year, and he was in the frenzy of finishing the list. So he had maybe a dozen or 15 or so. And so Rich and I would go with Dan, you know, a previous student, and he had us, like, the first day of school, we climbed Cannon and then over to Kinsman, north and south and back. And we had, you know, hiked, and every week it was like we had to go to a different place. So I got involved in, you know, him finishing them up, and he kept saying, you know, Mark, why don't you should, you know, climb them all. You should climb them all. So I finally got hooked on it. And if you have climbed all of them, you know, it really does get to be an obsession. You know, you just like got to climb one and got to knock off all the ones on the list. And so I did finish up, and I finished up with my neighbor, and he was like in the same spot I was previous. You know, he got the bug, and then he climbed them all, and then his, you know, son climbed them all. So so I'm sure that students of mine have, you know, gotten into hiking. No, I take that back. I was working at EMS, and a kid that I had in school, he came in and he had gotten a job, and so he had started to get some money, and there was burning a hole in his pocket, and he said, I'm going to get into hiking. And he came in and he said, okay, Mark, I need a backpack. And so we went over and picked those out. Mark, I needed this. And we talked a little bit about, you know, the, you know, mapping stuff and orienteering things that we did in class. So it was really fun. It was like a kid in a candy store, and we just went from, you know, here to there, and he was just going to buy all the stuff and go for it. And so I saw him playing disc golf about a month ago, and he was saying that he's done, you know, 21 of the 4,000 footers. So I'm sure there are people out there. Well, there's a couple examples, I guess. Sorry, that was a long answer.
That's so wonderful. Oh, Mark, I'm sure the impact continues to spread within our lives for sure.
Oh,
Boy,
thanks.
thank you so much for sharing this. This has been a great process. I loved being in your classroom this evening. This was really wonderful. And I totally want to make a topographical map of my location where I am now. So that would be really fun. But thank you for being so inspiring tonight.
Great, thanks.